So I just realized I was muted. So let me go on all this thing again. So you will see that right off the bat, when Dog is talking about that whatever his views are, the title of the video and the title of the talk is "The Lost Virtue of Sexism." So Dog doesn't want to hide what he wants to say here. He clearly says that, or he wants to point out to the people that he's talking about sexism and implicit benefits of the sexism, implicit and explicit benefits of the sexism. He's not trying to convey his arguments or his thoughts in a way to know that does not use any bad words or any of the words that evoke a lot of negative reaction. He does not want to hide its ideology and make it more appealing. He wants to appeal to the logos and the ethos of the people. He thinks that his arguments would stand their ground on those two factors, so he doesn't care about the third factor. We'll talk about this as he speaks, and it will be very important to see that. But before we see that and before we go, we must realize firstly this important thing. There is a very peculiar tendency among the people on the right to present their arguments in a way that is direct and straight up to the point. And because the left has created this environment in which those arguments are not particularly considered great, just because of the negative connotation of certain words that are associated with those arguments, it's very uphill task. So let's see what Doug does to manage or make way through that.
Widespread agreement, and I hope across the board. There's a large collection of behaviors toward women which no responsible person would ever want to defend. I'm speaking here of misogynistic and abusive behavior, rape, battery, molestation, harassment, gaslighting, and so on. There's a whole range of them. That's not an exhaustive list. That is a representative list. The admittedly provocative title of my talk was not trying to provoke anyone into thinking that I came here tonight in order to defend the indefensible as represented by anything like that. So when I am speaking of the lost virtue of sexism, I'm not referring to the most horrible thing that you can think of related to the subject of sexism. I think that we should all agree that that kind of abuse of women, that kind of treatment of women is unconscionable.
And this is the problem. So it is a provocative title. That is kind of okay because at least he's catering to the true tendencies of the people. But then he tries to appeal to the ethos of the people. And how he does that? He does that in a very interesting way. He starts criticizing all the extreme positions on his side. And it is very interesting to see. He talks about misogyny, he talks about rape, he talks about all other things, the abuse that the women face. But there's something to consider here. Are women the only gender who are facing the abuse? That is obviously not true. Even in the West, men face a lot more physical violence than women. Actually, in many countries of the West, the homicide rate where men are victims is actually twice than that of homicide rate where women are victims. So why does he need to start with all that remarks? If indeed the abuse uh, occurs to people of all genders, how is there a component of sexism in that? And if there is a component of sexism in the abuse, one must ask, if he is talking about the sexism that is creating problems for the women, why is he not talking about the sexism that creates problems for the men? And could they cancel out each other? And if they could not cancel out each other, then he can make an argument in which he shows that uh, because of inherent negative effects faced by the society's preconditioning, both by men and women, uh, the nuance in the arguments against sexism uh, and the nuances against in the arguments for sexism must be taken into account because the picture is not white or black. Because sexism is something that men and women both face, albeit in a different way, it must be of great importance to distance that sexism from the actual abuse, because the abuse is directed towards people of both the genders, and thus the feminism becomes less necessary, because feminism is contingent on the idea that women are somehow having a worse time than men. So this is the way that he could have pursued his argument, but he chooses not to do that, and there's a reason for that. We will look at that reason as we move on and listen to his other arguments. But the first thing he does, it is important to remember, is that to maintain the system of ethics and to appeal to the people, he tries to subvert that very system and counter signal his own claim. He's making a case that he is not a radical, that he is somewhere in between, but just a little bit to the right of the people that are present there, to make himself more appealing to the moral instincts of the people, when he could have simply avoided that. Because every person who is trying to go on the stage and argue for communism would have to at every time talk about how he disavows Stalin, Lenin, Marx, Pol Pot, and all the other dictators. It makes no sense. So why is he doing it? Because he has that perception in his mind that he knows that he has to make the claims that he's saying appeal to the moral conscience of the people. And in this, he's losing the sight of truth. And that is the whole point of this video, to show how conservatives sacrifice truth for morality. And we will see that happening again and again as he talks. However, we will not review all of the video. We will review a specific point that is of interest here, which is enough to show why conservatives lose. To look at that point, we will go to this point in a short while. But first, let us hear him talk more.
So nobody's defending it, nobody ought to defend it, and there is no defense, explicit or implicit, in what I'm going to say here tonight. So, thus far, we agree. So, the question would be, why defend any kind of sexism? If you're going to be as reasonable as all that, if you're going to say those bad things really are bad, why defend any sort of sexism? In the secular lexicon, I don't believe that these are dishonoring to women at all, but rather women are highly honored by them.
So, so here he's making an argument that what the liberals consider things that dishonor the woman, he thinks that those things honor the woman. And he's pursuing them not because of any biological uh, predicament of our human civilization to mold ourselves in the behavior that nature has forced us into in order to live in societies that can last long. But his main point is that it is about morality and honoring women. He's trying to appeal to women's sense of self esteem, and he would fail utterly in that. And we'll see why. So, Let's go further.
Before explaining this, however, I go into it knowing that what I call honoring, you might call patronizing. All right, I call it honor, you call it patronizing. By the same token, there are some things that you might applaud that I would think appalling. For a recent example, let's take the halftime show at the Super Bowl.
And you will see that when he said that, he could be talking about anything, but the crowd wouldn't know exactly what he would be talking about because the crowd knows what the halftime and the Super Bowl looks like and what is the moral problem with that. The crowd is not oblivious to it. The problem with Doug is that he is not pointing out something that is new and revealing to the people. People already know that. So he should take refuge of truth, not morality, because people already do not have a problem with engaging in that thing because they have a different set of morality or because they don't consider that morality to be important or because they just are apathetic about it. But let's see how the audience responds.
which, which, which some of you, yeah,
And you can see that there is an acknowledgement by the people, few people from the audience. And these people are not ashamed by talking about this because they believe that the point that they are speaking of is moral. They don't have any sign of guilt. So, him trying to appeal to the guilt conscience of the people won't simply work.
which some of you might consider empowering for women, but which I would consider a skankfest.
Uh, it is worth looking at the video and seeing the reactions among the people. What is important here is to realize this. What is happening? Well, Dog is saying about clearly about sexual objectification of women, a point that feminists also raise. But the women raised that point, and the men who raise that point about sexual objectification of women and how it is bad only raise it because they believe that women lose a power when women lose power when they are objectified against their will. Otherwise, women are happy being attracting attention and fame and money by acting in a manner that could be considered not particularly decent. And this is where Dog fails. Dog has this mentality in his mind about honor, which is so Western and is distanced from reality in such a way that could not be comprehended. Honor is something that you put forward to other people. It is a reflection of your beliefs. It is a reflection of your actions. It is not, and I say it again, something that is provided by others to you. It is only provided by others to you in retrospect. Once you do something honorable, people honor you. People don't honor you in a normative sense of the word. This is the reason why when Dog says that honoring women is important, women responded in this fashion because if they are being enjoying the benefits of the sexual objectification and the men are enjoying watching those women, they have no problem with it. The honor argument would only be applicable if the people in the crowd would have a mentality that their honor is something that they should defend. But that is not how they are thinking. What they are thinking is that their honor is something that they should extract or demand from other people no matter what they do. As such, if to all these women, you say to these women that you will give them a lot of money and a lot of fame, and you erect a pole and say, now go and perform a striptease on that pole or a pole dance, a lot of women, if they would believe that they would be honored, even after doing that, would have no problem doing that because that is something that is sexually that has sexually originated. Women try to appeal to men's sexual instincts to gain resources. That is how mating works. Dog here is trying to fight against that truth. People in the crowd, though they may be immoral, are completely in line with the truth. They know that the woman who is on the stage is getting benefits. Dog is saying, look after your honor. But they don't care about the honor because the dishonor is not impacting them in any way. Dog here is defeating his own arguments. In order to stand his own ground, He could have adopted different tactics, but he does not do that. He tries to appeal to the honor of the woman. But honor of the woman is only contingent on the fact, the honor of the woman arises only in conditions in which they believe that there will be a negative effect of not acting honorably. This is the reason why none of these students raises a strong objection to the presence of sexual objectification of women in events of mass importance. Few people are just laughing it away. That is a very key and crucial aspect. If the conservatives stuck with the truth, if they would stuck with the arguments that really exist in reality rather than appealing to the moral sense of the people, they would have some success. But Dog is not doing that. Douglas is trying to follow a very strange path, though a very popular path among the conservatives, traditionalists, and few people who are on the right wing, in a very in a very interesting way. He tries to argue that join our side and we will honor you. And we are here for honoring women. And we are here for protecting women. And we are here for providing women self esteem. But aside from the protection, honoring and self esteem is something that women do not care about. Because as long as there are negative consequences for not being honorable or having self esteem, they want to do what they like. They believe that their self esteem is boosted by catching male attention. This is the reason why it is called empowerment. They believe that as long as they continue to create a climate in which any negative argument against the women who act in a slutty manner is curbed, is stormed to the ground, they will retain their honor. So they have created an artificial sense of honor and self esteem. And he cannot cut through it because he has nothing to offer them in return. He's saying that come here, we will honor you, but you will have to leave what you want to do, what you really like. You can't now just show your ass, or you cannot dance naked, half naked, attaching yourself to a pole. But if the woman can get that, and the woman can get honor, why wouldn't they take that deal? The problem here is that Douglas doesn't understand how ethics work. He thinks ethics work like the truth, but that is not how they work. And we will see how he tries to navigate his way through this minefield.
You, you, you might, you might, you might think, you,
You can see how
you,
uncomfortable
you
he
might,
is.
you might, you might think,
And
you might think,
that is the path that he has chosen for himself. He is the one uncomfortable here, while the people who are doing something that is, or who are supporting something that is indecent, are very confident. And the reason for that is that one of the reasons for that obviously is the society lays more favor to those people. But the second reason is that he is not arguing in line with the truth.
uh, I've, I've been in the ministry for over 40 years. I've seen everything. All right. So you might think that women are being elevated by an activity that I would regard as degrading. Even though you can shinny up it, a stripper pole is not the way of promotion for women.
You see two voices in the background. One of them says, uh, it pays well. And the second is also very interesting. Let's go back and try to listen to them.
For women.
So there are two different voices. One of them says disagree, and the second says that it pays so well. So it is elevating because it pays well. And it is elevating because it is pretty wonderful. It raises the hormones, it allows you to pursue your sexual instinct and without any negative consequences or negative consequences, only in a sense that you cannot perceive at that point in time. The people in the crowd are rejecting Dog's opinions in a very straightforward way. They are saying, yeah, we want to be the ones dancing uh, around the stripper pole. And Dog cannot say anything to that. He's failed, he's blinded, he's muted. He cannot see how he can overcome that argument. He cannot speak against it because speaking against it would require to subscribe to the truth that indeed a lot of people like that. He would have to convince himself that the thing that he is trying to argue against is a natural reaction or natural instinct or natural love that people have. And he can simply approach truth and strictly condemn that behavior and act like fire, imposing on these people. But he just chooses not to do that. And the reason why he chooses not to do that is because he himself is not convinced about the truth.
Yeah. I would point to the fact that the Apostle Peter said that husbands were required to honor their wives. 1 Peter 3:7. A virtuous wife is a crown to her husband. Proverbs 12:4. Not a foot scraper for muddy boots. A virtuous wife has a value far beyond rubies. Proverbs 31:10. She is a treasure. Yes, you might reply, she's a treasure in the way that a porcelain doll might be a treasure. She's an artificial treasure placed on top of an artificial pedestal. That would be the response. And there we are, looking at one another across a chasm. There are some abuses that we can all agree to call abuses. Everybody here would call it an abuse. We can all agree to call certain things abuses. But when it comes to this, what I see as black, you see as white, and vice versa. Now what? Do we just shrug and go our separate ways? Do we return to our battle stations in the culture wars? Is it time to man the barricades again? What do we do when we agree? What do we do when we differ? And this is one of the places where we differ, right? One of the places where we differ is that the Christians I know wouldn't dream of going to an event of yours and trying to disrupt it. Whenever there's
And when he says that, uh, people just laugh it off because they don't care about any of that. The problem again here is that a violent dog may create a very slow movement that ultimately leads to a triumph of Christian values. He's not being the defender of the truth. He's talking to brats who don't care about a lot of things that he is saying. And he cannot be pretty aggressive because to be aggressive, he needs to stand on a firm foundation. The issue with conservatives uh, is exactly that. Conservatives, when they're talking about culture, often forget that culture is pretty different nowadays than it was before. And it is not just because of arguments that have been made for one point against the other, but this culture is uh, actually has been created because of a successive uh, fusion of the ethos and the pathos, which is something that never occurred before. Because of this successful fusion, finds it very hard to make his case because the people think that what they are doing is also pretty moral, and he cannot argue against that. What he has to argue against uh, is something that is an implicit belief of the people, and there is no way to argue except of appealing a higher conscience among the people who which can, he hopes, overturn this radical narrative that the people have. This is the reason why a lot of ideologies that developed after sensing all those things in liberalism do not give importance to ethos or pathos. And the reason for that is this: the ethos and the pathos can always be merged together. People love pathos if they can be convinced that they are doing a higher thing by going after what they desire, then they would continue doing it. That uh, morality that justifies their inner interests can be developed easily, especially if the inner interests are pretty strong, and sex is a very powerful impulse. This is the reason why these arguments should be approached in a different manner if one is to defend the truth. But if one is to develop a movement slowly, he can win by presenting his arguments because the culture overturns after every so years. But that win is not his, and that is the great point. That win occurs because people feel that they are not now getting all those benefits of that pathos that they initially hoped. So they revert back to other secondary pathos. It's kind of like this, that in a world where there is a lot of family life, people want to switch to uh, pleasures that they can get by destroying or weakening that family life. But in a culture where sex is the most important thing, people after a point in time get bored and want to move back to the family life to experience pleasures. If your movement is only contingent on what people want, it will always be subjected to it. If your movement is contingent on morality, it will always be subjected to this cycle. The only way it can win this cycle is if it stands on something that is consistent in both of these things, which is truth, the logos. And then that logos can be used in many different ways to make an argument for ethos and pathos. But morality is not an origination of truth or liking. Truth is the origination of liking and morality. And this is where a lot of reactionaries differ from it. Neo reactionaries, traditionalists, and conservatives. They value truth more than morality and preferences.